At 1:17 in the morning, the trap was already closed. That train was moving, but nobody in that third boxcar was going anywhere. Not without permission. Not without pain. Not without somebody losing something they couldn't replace. I could feel it in the rails before we ever hit the bridge. The way the wheels talked back. The way the night held its breath like it knew what was coming and didn't want to be accused of watching. Inside that car, bodies were packed in like cargo that complained too much. Chains linked wrists to wrists. Ankles to iron rings bolted into the wood. The air was thick with sweat, old sickness, and the kind of fear that doesn't shout, it just sits on your chest and waits. Some were men. Some were women. One older lady kept her face turned away from everybody, like looking at suffering had become too expensive. There were kids in there too, young enough to still believe the world might apologize. Nobody said prisoners. Not out here. Out here they called them workers before dawn and criminals before breakfast. The paperwork could say anything. Vagrancy, theft, assault. A word used like a hammer when a man wanted somebody erased. The ink didn't care if it was true. The boxcar rolled over rough joints in the track, bouncing hard enough to make iron bite into skin. Every jolt dragged somebody's shackles just a little deeper. Every sway sloshed the bucket in the corner, making the stink climb into everybody's mouth. That's how they built the system. Not just with law, with filth. With exhaustion, with the slow lesson that you don't own your own breath. And the guards, they weren't nervous, not even a little. Two of them walked the narrow gap between cars like they were strolling a porch after supper, shotguns hanging loose easy. They didn't need to hold them tight. The train was their weapon. The county was their backup. The courts were their alibi. Up front in the engine cab, the real problem sat like he was born in the seat. Deputy Lyle Reddick, young, clean. That kind of clean that comes from never having to scrub your own mistakes off your hands. Hair slicked down, boots kicked up like this was a parlor, not a machine pulling human misery across open country. He had a shiny pistol on his hip, too pretty to be honest. The way he wore it told you everything you needed to know. He wasn't carrying protection. He was carrying permission. He passed a silver flask to the engineer like he was doing the man a favor. "Drink," he said, all smooth and friendly. That fake warmth people use when they think you're trapped. The engineer didn't touch it. Finn Mallory, old railman, war-hardened, hands built for levers and regret, kept both palms where they belonged. One on the throttle, one on the brake. Eyes forward, jaw locked. He didn't like the kid, and the kid could taste it. "You ever hear about this bend?" Lyle asked, leaning close, voice low like a story told for fun. "They say the devil takes a bite out of men here." Finn didn't answer. Men like him don't waste words when the stakes are real. Lyle found that amusing. "My father owns this line," he said, like he was blessing the air with his family name. "Owns the courts. Owns the men who swing the hammers. By dawn, those people in that boxcar are gonna be building fence on my ranch. And nobody's gonna call it slavery. They'll call it justice." He smiled while he said it, like cruelty was a business plan. Finn's shoulders didn't move, but something in him shifted. The kind of shift you get when an old wound gets pressed on purpose. He kept his eyes on the track, but his mind wasn't there. He was somewhere else. Somewhere with rope and screaming. Somewhere with a woman's face burned into memory so deep it never stops hurting. That's what they never understand about a man like Finn. They think because he's quiet, he's empty. No. Quiet men are full. They're just careful about what spills. The train kept pulling forward, heavy with freight and heavier with souls. Outside, the land was flat and unforgiving. Wind pushed through grass like it was searching for a place to hide. The moon was thin and useless, just enough light to remind you how dark everything else was. Ahead was Devil's Bend, a trestle that lifted the track off the ground like a promise nobody asked for. And beneath it, a dry arroyo that looked harmless. That's the trick, see? Dry riverbeds always look harmless until the wrong night comes. Lyle turned his head toward Finn again. "You know what I'd do if I was you," he said, still playing. "I'd pray, because if anything happens to this train, my father will turn this county inside out. He'll burn the world down just to find who touched his property." Finn finally spoke, just 2 words, "Sit down." Lyle laughed like he'd been invited to dinner. He leaned back, took another sip from his flask, and watched the track ahead like he was watching the future line up for him. But the future was already bought. Just not by him. Because miles back, in the dark where the law didn't bother to look, a woman had been working with the kind of patience that scares kings. Her name wasn't important to most people. People like Lyle didn't learn names unless they planned to use them in court or carve them into a warning. But in the camps, in the shanties, in the whispered networks that kept families alive, they knew her. Lucia. Not a preacher, not a politician, not a dreamer. A worker who understood wood grain, steel weight, and the way men like Amos Reddick built power. She didn't fight them with fists, she fought them with math. For 3 years she'd walked those tracks, driven spikes, replaced ties, learned every weak spot the inspectors ignored because somebody's pocket got heavier, learned every schedule the county used to move convicts like livestock. She knew this train, Iron Horse number 7. She knew its monthly rhythm like a heartbeat you can predict when you've watched it long enough. She knew the guard pattern too, 2 on the walk, 4 drunk in the caboose, 1 spoiled son in the cab acting like the engine belonged to his bloodline. And she knew this trestle, Devil's Bend, wasn't failing by accident. Not tonight. A week earlier, during a night shift, somebody had swapped the inside of a key support beam. Not enough to look suspicious. Just enough to make sure it would hold, right up until the exact moment it couldn't. That's how you beat a system. You don't swing at its face. You take out its knees when it's standing on a cliff. The engine started up the grade toward the trestle, slow and steady. Finn's eyes flicked to his pocket watch. The hands crept into place like they were obeying an appointment. 1:17. Lyle was still talking, still smiling. Finn didn't look at him, he was listening instead, not to the kid, to the rails. And the rails were speaking in a language he wished he didn't understand. A faint change in vibration. A slight wrongness in the way the steel answered the wheels. Not loud. Not dramatic, just off. Finn's fingers tightened on the throttle. He felt the heat of the boiler through the floor. Felt the pull of the train behind him like a giant hand trying to drag him into a grave. Lyle followed his gaze. "What is it?" he asked, the first hint of uncertainty slipping through the polish. Finn didn't say a word, because the moment you name danger it becomes real. And then it happened. Not a big crash at first. Not the kind of thing stories exaggerate. A sharp crack. Like a bone snapping clean, the trestle shuddered, the engine lurched, and the whole world tilted. Finn's body moved before his mind could argue with it. Muscle memory, survival, the kind of instinct you earn in wars and never shake. Lyle grabbed for something, anything, to keep from falling, his smile evaporating, replaced by a sound he didn't recognize as his own. Then the center gave way. Wood folded inward like it had been waiting to betray them. The forward weight dropped hard. Metal screamed. Couplings snapped with a violent pop that echoed into the night. The engine pitched nose first off the track. For a split second it felt like floating. Then gravity collected its debt. The cab tore away, pulling Lyle's world down with it. Finn flung himself toward the open side, not heroic, not dramatic, just desperate and practiced. He hit the embankment hard, rolled through grass and dirt and sharp rock, and came up coughing, half blind from steam and dust. Behind him, the engine hit the bottom of the arroyo with a crash that shook the earth. The boiler ruptured. Steam exploded upward like a white-hot beast trying to escape its own skin. The whistle screamed once, warped, dying, then went silent. And that third boxcar, it didn't just derail, it was thrown. The car twisted sideways, slammed, and started to tumble, tearing itself apart with 40 chain bodies inside it. Wood splintered. Iron buckled. Chains snapped tight and ripped into flesh. Screams burst out of the wreckage like birds shot out of the sky. The guards on the walk were gone in an instant, flung off into darkness, swallowed by the violence they thought they controlled. For a moment the night was nothing but sound and fire. Then a hush, not peace. The kind of hush you get after somebody slams a door on a room full of secrets. Finn lay in the grass, staring back at the wreck, hearing the crackle of fire and the hiss of steam. His chest rose and fell like it didn't trust the air. He expected footsteps, shouting, gunfire. Instead, he saw shadows moving with purpose, not panicked men, a team. Figures ran to the torn-open boxcar with bolt cutters that caught the firelight. Hands moved fast, efficient, like surgeons working in the dark. Chains fell away, one after another, not slow, not sloppy, precise. And then Finn understood this wasn't a tragedy, this was a takeover. A low voice cut through the chaos, controlled, iron calm. Move, no crying, no prayers, you want to live, you walk. People stumbled out, half broken, wrists bleeding, eyes wild. Some collapsed, others were pulled upright and pushed forward. Finn pushed himself to his knees, trying to find the speaker through smoke. He didn't see her clearly, but he felt her presence like cold steel in a warm room. Lucia didn't waste time looking at the dead. She was counting the living, and she was already thinking ahead because the real enemy wasn't the wreck. The real enemy was what would come with daylight. Somebody pinned something to a saddle in the chaos, a square of cloth marked with bold letters. Finn couldn't read it from where he lay, but he didn't need to. He could feel the message. We were here. You didn't stop us. Try again. The freed men and women were moved out into the brush, guided toward the north like the night itself had opened a corridor just for them. Finn watched them vanish, and for a second he felt something dangerous in his chest. Hope. The fire ate at the wreckage behind them, hiding what needed hiding. Finn coughed, tasted ash, and tried to stand. Seeing Lyall's shape in the arroyo, what was left of him, made Finn's stomach clench. Not pity, not sympathy, just the cold knowledge of what this would cost. Because when a man like Amos Reddick loses his son, he doesn't grieve. He collects, and he never collects politely. Finn turned his head toward the dark prairie where Lucia's people had disappeared. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know how far the network reached. But he knew one thing sure as iron. By sunrise, this county would be hunting blood. And somewhere out there, moving through grass and shadow, Lucia was already planning for the next move, while a worse betrayal, one she hadn't sniffed yet, was quietly deciding whether to sell her out for a handful of safety. Morning didn't come like mercy. It came like an audit. Gray light slid over the prairie and found what fire couldn't swallow. Bent iron, split timbers. A trail of black smoke rising like a finger pointing straight at somebody's pride. By the time the first riders showed up, the wreck wasn't just a disaster. It was an insult. Sheriff Amos Reddick rode at the front, and you could feel the county tighten around him the same way a fist tightens around a knife. He didn't gallop. He didn't hurry. Men like that don't rush to tragedy. They arrive to claim it. He came with 20 hard-eyed deputies, and behind them, more men who weren't sworn to the law so much as sworn to him. The kind who wore their Sunday faith on their tongue and their midnight loyalty in a closet. They moved through the wreckage with their guns drawn anyway, not because they feared survivors, because they feared being made small. Somebody found the first guard with his face gone wrong against a tie. Somebody else found another twisted where the rocks lived. Death had been busy, and it had been careless about uniforms. Then they found Lyall, or what steam and impact left of him. A deputy leaned down, reached for the gold-plated pistol out of habit. Like the gun still mattered, like it could still pay its way out of anything. Amos slapped that man's hand away so hard the sound carried. He crouched, looked at his son's ruined eyes without blinking. That's the kind of cold you learn when you've spent your whole life practicing ownership over other people's pain. But his jaw worked. Slow, not grief. Calculation trying to stay upright while rage kept pushing it down the stairs. "Where are the prisoners?" he asked. Nobody answered. Because the wreck should have been full of bodies. Instead, it was full of broken chains. 40 sets of iron sat there like peeled skin, some still bolted to boards that had snapped. Others lying loose in the mud, clean-cut, like somebody treated steel the way a barber treats hair. Not torn, not hacked. Cut. And Amos saw it. He saw the edges. He saw the precision. That's when his anger changed shape. It stopped being loud and it became surgical. A deputy brought him the note. Cloth pinned to leather, words written with a steady hand. Bold enough to be read from a saddle. Calm enough to make a man feel stupid for shaking. Amos read it once. Then again. Then he held it out so everyone could see it, like scripture from a new religion he intended to burn out of the county. "Whoever did this," he said, voice flat, "knew this line better than the men who built it." He stood up, looked across the prairie like the grass itself might flinch. "You don't get 40 people out of chains in the dark unless you rehearsed it," he continued. "You don't break a trestle on schedule unless you put your hands inside it days before. And you don't write a message like this unless you think I can't reach you." The deputies shifted. They could hear it now. The sheriff wasn't asking questions. He was announcing a hunt. "Find every rail worker in this county," Amos said. "Every section hand, every switchman, every man who touches iron for a living. I want names. I want families. I want pressure." One of the younger deputies swallowed, trying to keep up with the speed of Amos's mind. "And if they don't talk?" Amos turned his head slow, like he was studying the boy's face for weakness. "Then they learn." That was the day the county stopped pretending it had laws. It had appetite. And it had a man who needed blood to balance what his eyes had just seen. They wrote their official story later. Bridge failure. Accident. Prisoners escaped in confusion. That paperwork was for outsiders. But down here, among the men who knew the smell of power, the truth moved faster than ink. Somebody had taken the iron horse. Somebody had turned the rails into a road to freedom. And the sheriff's son had died sitting in the wrong seat. By afternoon, smoke from Devil's Bend was still visible miles away. A warning to the weak, a signal to the bold. Finn Mallory didn't go home. He couldn't. A man doesn't walk away from a thing like that and return to ordinary life. Not when his hands were the hands that drove the machine into the trap. He kept to the edges, slipping past roads, moving the way people move when they're already guilty of something they can't speak out loud. He followed signs nobody else noticed. A broken twig angled a certain way. A strip of cloth tied low on a mesquite branch. Marks that looked like accident to a stranger and looked like language to somebody who'd been invited. By nightfall, he found the place. An old cotton gin abandoned by progress and rot. The kind of building the county forgot about because it wasn't profitable anymore. But inside it was alive, not with comfort, with purpose. Lantern light threw shadows across faces that didn't trust hope enough to smile. Men with wrists still raw, women with eyes like stone. A couple of teenagers too young to be this quiet, taught early that silence keeps you breathing. Finn stepped in slow, hands open. Nobody welcomed him. They didn't need to. One wrong man in the room could get them all hung. Then she walked out from behind a stack of rusted machinery. Lucia. She didn't carry herself like a victim. She didn't carry herself like a hero either. She carried herself like a foreman who knows the job has to get done whether anybody likes it or not. Her dress was patched and faded. Her boots were work boots. Her hands were thick with callus, the kind you earn by driving spikes all day and stitching wounds all night. But the real thing about her wasn't the strength. It was the stillness. People who have lost too much learn to stop performing emotions for anybody's comfort. Finn tried to speak. Lucia lifted a hand and the room obeyed her without a word. "You jumped," she said to him, voice calm. It wasn't a question. Finn nodded. "I did." "You jumped when I needed you to," she said. "That means you're either with us or you're about to regret being alive." Finn swallowed. "I didn't do it for you." Lucia's eyes didn't soften. They didn't harden either. They just stayed steady. "I know who you did it for," she said. Finn's hand twitched toward his vest, where a small photo lived like a buried coal. The only proof he ever loved something pure. The only proof the county took it from him anyway. Lucia stepped closer. "You saw what they did to those people," she said, low enough that only he heard. "They were going to work them until sickness or stone finished the job. That train wasn't transportation. It was a pipeline." Finn looked past her at the freed prisoners huddled in the shadows. He couldn't argue. Lucia turned, raised her voice slightly so the room could hear. "Listen," she said. "Devil's Bend wasn't the plan. It was the rehearsal that counted." A ripple moved through the room. Not excitement, caution. Because anybody who calls a derailment a rehearsal is either brilliant or insane. Lucia walked to a table made from old planks and laid out a hand-drawn map. Tracks, grades, crossings, patrol points, marked like a general's work. She wasn't guessing. She knew every inch. "We got 40 out," she said. That's 40 families who aren't getting funeral letters this month. A murmur, then quiet again. But Amos Reddick doesn't lose like that, she continued. He takes it personal, he takes it public, and he takes it out on whoever he can reach. One of the women by the lantern spoke up, voice tight. He'll burn camps. Lucia nodded once. He'll burn them whether we do this or not, she said. The only difference is if we do this, there's a reason the smoke rises. Finn watched her, the way she held the room without volume, the way she spoke like she was reading from a ledger only she could see. A man with a scarred face and missing fingers leaned over the map, veteran hands, the kind that learned sabotage in war and never forgot it. We can't keep hitting water crossings, he said, not if the next one floods. Lucia met his eyes. Then we don't hit water, she answered. We hit what they think can't be touched. We hit where they feel safest. Finn felt a chill, because that meant escalation, not just rescue. War. Somewhere near Lucia's feet, a small shape shifted. A child, 7 maybe, quiet like he'd been trained to be invisible. He clung to Lucia's skirt without making a sound. Finn's gaze dropped. The boy looked up. And in that lantern light, Finn saw something that didn't belong in this room. Blue eyes, not just light. Reddick blue. The kind of eyes that would get a child killed if the wrong man saw them. Lucia noticed Finn looking. Her hand slid down, resting on the boy's head. Protective but not gentle. More like she was anchoring him to earth. Don't stare, she said softly to Finn, not an order, a warning. Finn's mouth went dry. Who is he? Finn asked. Lucia's eyes didn't move. A reason, she said. Then she turned back to the room, back to the map, back to the plan, and Finn realized the truth that made his ribs tighten. Lucia wasn't just fighting the sheriff's system. She was fighting a clock, because if Amos Reddick learned about that boy, this wasn't going to be about trains anymore. It was going to be about bait. Lucia tapped the map. Next run is bigger, she said. More bodies, more chains, more guards. The veteran with the missing fingers frowned, and more eyes watching. Lucia nodded. Good, she said. Let them watch the wrong place. Then she looked at Finn like she was testing the last piece of the machine. You still got the stomach to drive? She asked. Finn stared at her for a long beat. Outside, wind scraped the broken gin walls like something trying to get in. Inside, 40 freed souls waited for his answer like it was a verdict. Finn finally spoke, voice rough. I'll drive. Lucia didn't thank him. She just leaned in close enough that only he could hear. Then understand this, she said. If Amos can't catch us, he'll punish everything around us. Camps, families, children. Finn's throat tightened. Lucia's voice stayed even. And if we get betrayed from inside this room, she continued, he won't need to search. He'll come straight through the door. Across the gin, one of the men near the entrance shifted his weight. Just a small movement. But Lucia's eyes flicked toward him for half a second too long. Like she felt something in the air. Like she caught the scent of fear mixed with opportunity. And in that moment, Finn understood the real danger. Not the sheriff. Not the tracks. Not the guns. The real danger was that somebody in this room might decide survival is worth more than loyalty and go whisper their names into the wrong ear before sunrise. Fear doesn't announce itself. It watches. By the second night in that gin, everybody could feel it moving between them like a draft nobody could block. People spoke quieter, slept lighter. Every cough sounded like a signal. Every footstep outside made hands drift toward whatever metal they still trusted. Lucia noticed all of it. She always did. She didn't confront it, didn't call a meeting, didn't ask questions that could scare the truth deeper into hiding. She let fear breathe just enough to show its shape. That's how you learn who's breathing with it and who's feeding it. The freed people were moved out in small groups before dawn. Wagons rolled north without lanterns, guided by memory and stars. No goodbyes, no speeches. Freedom doesn't wait for ceremony. By sunrise, the gin held only the core. The ones who stayed because they didn't know how to run anymore. Finn sat on a crate near the wall, hands wrapped around a tin cup he hadn't touched. His eyes kept drifting to the door, then back to Lucia like he was measuring exits he didn't plan to take. Lucia stood over the map, adjusting routes with charcoal, her mind already 3 steps ahead of whatever the sheriff was planning to do next. She knew Amos Reddick, not personally, not like men know each other in bars or courtrooms. She knew his hunger. Men like Amos don't need justice. They need balance. And balance to them always means somebody else bleeding long enough to make the loss feel fair. He would burn rail camps. He would arrest men just to see who cried first. He would squeeze until something gave, and something always does. Midday brought word from the south. A runner arrived barefoot and shaking, carrying news like a wound. 2 camps gone. Canvas and wood burned down to nothing. Families scattered. 3 men shot trying to run. Lucia listened without blinking. When the runner finished, she nodded once. "Eat," she told him, "then sleep." That was it, no anger, no visible reaction. Because when you lead people who have already lost everything, panic is contagious, calm is currency. But when she turned back to the map, Finn saw it, her hand shook, just for a second. That's when he understood something else. Lucia wasn't fearless, she was disciplined, and discipline costs more the longer you carry it. That evening, while the sky bruised itself purple, Lucia sent Finn out on a quiet errand, check a relay point. No lanterns, no talking. Just eyes and ears. Finn didn't argue. He moved through the grass the way men do when they don't expect applause. Careful, low, listening more than looking. He came back an hour later with nothing to report. That should have been good news. It was. Inside the gin, the atmosphere had shifted, not loud, not obvious. Wrong, the man near the door, Marcus, they called him, sat a little straighter than before. Too clean, too composed for someone who'd supposedly escaped chains. Lucia noticed too. She didn't accuse. She poured water into cups. Handed one to Marcus herself. "Hard day," she said. Marcus nodded, grateful, eyes down. "Hard times." Lucia watched how he drank. How his hands didn't tremble like someone fresh from irons. How his eyes kept flicking toward the map, then away, like he was memorizing instead of studying. She said nothing. That night Lucia didn't sleep. She sat with her back to a beam, revolver loose in her lap, listening to the building settle and the men breathe. Listening for patterns. Around midnight Marcus stood, quiet, careful, too careful. He moved toward the door like a man who'd practiced the walk in his head. No rush, no hesitation. Lucia didn't move. She waited until he had 1 foot outside. Then she spoke. "Where you going?" The room froze. Marcus turned slowly, hands open, already wearing the right expression. Confused, harmless. "Just checking the perimeter." Lucia tilted her head. "The perimeter's been checked," she said. "Twice." Silence stretched. Finn felt his stomach drop, not because of Marcus, because of what would come next. Marcus swallowed. "I thought I heard something." Lucia stood, calm, measured. "You hear a lot," she said, "more than most." Marcus smiled weakly. "I'm just being careful." Lucia stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. "Careful men don't wander alone at night," she said. "They wake somebody." The air went tight. Marcus made his choice. He bolted. Finn moved without thinking, but Lucia was faster. She grabbed Marcus's collar, yanked him back inside, and slammed him against a support beam hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The revolver came up, not shaking, barrel steady as a promise. "Who do you talk to?" she asked. Marcus coughed, tried to laugh. "You're making a mistake." Lucia leaned in close enough that only he could hear her. "No," she said. "You did." The others crowded in, rage and fear mixing ugly. The veteran with the missing fingers reached for Marcus's throat. Lucia raised a hand. "No." She kept her eyes on Marcus. "Who?" she asked again. Marcus's jaw clenched. Finn watched the calculation run across the man's face. The math of survival, 1 life weighed against many. Loyalty measured against blood. Marcus exhaled. "The sheriff," he said. The word landed heavy. "I leave notes," Marcus continued, voice shaking now. "Dead drops, he pays, or he promised to." Lucia didn't flinch. "About what?" "Trains, routes, names." He hesitated, then added softer, "about the boy." Lucia's breath caught, just a fraction. Enough. The room erupted. Hands grabbed Marcus. Someone hit him, hard. Blood sprayed against the beam. Lucia didn't stop them at first. Then she did. "Enough." They froze. Lucia wiped Marcus's blood off her knuckles on her apron, eyes cold. "He knows," she said to the room. "And if he knows, he's already moving." Finn felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Lucia looked at Marcus like she was deciding whether a tool was still useful. "You told him everything?" she asked. Marcus shook his head fast. "Not everything, I swear." Lucia smiled. "It wasn't kind. Then you're still breathing for a reason." She turned to the others. "We don't kill him," she said. "Not yet." A murmur of protest. Lucia cut it off with a look. "We use him." She leaned down until her face was inches from Marcus's. "You're going to tell Amos exactly what I want him to hear," she said. "You're going to send him somewhere empty, cold, and far away." Marcus nodded frantically. "And if you don't," Lucia continued, voice low and lethal, "I won't kill you. I'll send what's left of you back to him in pieces small enough to count." Marcus broke. "I'll do it," he whispered. "I'll do whatever you want." Lucia stood. "Good." She turned to Finn. "Pack light," she said. "Next run moves sooner than planned." Finn frowned. "Sooner." Lucia nodded. "Before Amos finishes tightening the rope." She glanced toward the corner where the boy slept, small chest rising and falling. "And before he realizes exactly what he's hunting." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tin like a warning knocking at the door. Somewhere south, Amos Reddick was already sharpening his response. And now, thanks to Marcus, he thought he knew where to strike. What he didn't know yet was that Lucia had just decided to flip the board. And when she did, somebody was going to walk straight into a killing field they helped design, believing they were the ones holding the trap. The lie was delivered before dawn. Marcus didn't argue, didn't stall. He wrote the message with shaking hands, charcoal biting into scrap wood like it wanted the truth instead. A new date, a new mile marker. A clean story about tighter patrols and sudden fear. Lucia watched every stroke, not hovering, not correcting. She wanted to see how a man lies when his life depends on it. When he finished, she read it once, then nodded. "Good enough to kill men over," she said. Marcus flinched. They sent him out alone. No escort, no threat shouted after him, just silence and trust that wasn't real, the kind that makes betrayal heavier, not lighter. Once he vanished into the dark, Finn exhaled slow. "You think he sticks to the script?" Lucia didn't answer right away. "He'll stick to the part that keeps him breathing," she said. "That's usually enough." She rolled the map tighter, then pulled another from beneath it. This one was newer, cleaner, drawn from memory, not habit. "Actual runs 2 nights earlier," she said. "Flat ground, open prairie, no water, no bridges that can drown people faster than we can save them." The veteran nodded. "Cleaner." "Deadlier if it goes wrong," Finn said. Lucia met his eyes. "Everything is." They moved before the county noticed the shift. Before Amos finished burning his second camp, before rumor could outpace action. The boy was sent north at first light. Lucia didn't cry when she kissed his forehead. She didn't promise she'd follow. She didn't tell him stories. She told him instructions. "Listen to who they tell you to listen to," she said. "Don't say my name, and if anyone asks, you don't remember my face." The boy nodded, too serious, too smart. "Come find me," he whispered. Lucia smiled. "Stay alive," she said. "I'll do the same." She watched the wagon disappear until there was nothing left to watch. Then she turned back south. That night, Amos Reddick rode out with nearly 100 men, rifles across saddles, dogs straining at leashes. He was certain enough to be generous with whiskey. Certain enough to believe his son's ghost was finally pointing him in the right direction. He took them to the wrong place. They waited in freezing wind, crouched in tall grass, eyes locked on empty rails, and nothing came. No whistle, no vibration, no scream of steel. By the time doubt crept in, it was already too late. Because miles away, under a moon that didn't bother to witness, Iron Horse number 11 hit the mark. Not with drama, with efficiency. The derailment was controlled, planned. The engine slid sideways, tearing track loose without flipping. Guards scrambled. Shots cracked the night. Finn jumped early, rolled hard, came up running. Lucia's people were already moving. Bolt cutters sang. Chains fell. Men poured out, coughing, crying, laughing like they'd been punched by freedom. 3 minutes, that's all it took. Relay wagons surged forward like they'd been waiting their whole lives. By the time Amos realized he'd been sent chasing ghosts, 50 people were already moving north under fresh names. They left him a message anyway, pinned to a rail spike, not mocking, measured, "You looked the wrong way." Amos found Marcus's body at dawn, 4 shots to the chest. He didn't ask why, he just understood what it meant. Back in the prairie, Lucia stood watching smoke rise from the wreck she'd already abandoned. Her hands were steady again, but the war had changed shape. She'd de-saved dozens, broken a system, and now Amos Reddick knew something else. This wasn't just resistance, this was strategy. And the next move wouldn't be about trains, it would be about her. Somewhere between her and the border, the noose was already being measured. The county went quiet in a way that didn't mean peace. It meant preparation. When Amos Reddick stopped burning camps, people noticed. When patrols stopped riding loud and drunk, people noticed more. Silence like that doesn't come from mercy. It comes from a man changing tactics. Lucia felt it before anyone brought word. No smoke columns. No midnight raids. No bodies left where they could be counted. Just eyes. Too many of them. Men she didn't recognize standing near depots a little too long. Riders asking questions they already knew the answers to. Friendly voices pretending to be lost while memorizing faces. That's when you know the hunter stopped swinging and started aiming. Finn came back one evening with his coat torn and blood on his sleeve that wasn't his. "They're not chasing trains anymore," he said. "They're chasing you." Lucia nodded. She'd already done the math. "Good," she said. "That means the others have time." The veteran leaned in. "You're the bait now." Lucia met his eyes. "I always was." They moved again. Smaller, quieter. No more big jobs. No more messages pinned in plain sight. The legend had legs now. It didn't need feeding every night. But Amos didn't care about legends. He cared about closure. And then it happened. A whisper reached them through a woman who sold bread by day and secrets by night. Amos wasn't asking about derailments anymore. He was asking about a child, a boy, about 7, light eyes. Lucia felt it hit her like a hammer to the ribs, not panic, not yet recognition. "He knows," Finn said. Lucia didn't answer. She walked outside, stared into the dark like it might lie to her if she stared hard enough. If Amos had the boy's description, that meant one thing. The betrayal had gone deeper than plans and maps. It had touched blood. They moved Caleb north faster, changed wagons twice, changed names, changed the story. Lucia didn't go with him, couldn't. Every mile she stayed close was another mile Amos could follow. She stood at the border marker again, watched the wagon disappear into mist, and felt something inside her go hollow. Then she turned back, because that's what generals do when they send their heart away. They finished the war. 2 days later, a body showed up hanging near a rail crossing. White man, switch worker, no note, no explanation. It wasn't one of theirs. That was Amos speaking, not to Lucia, to the county. Finn read the message clearly. "He's flushing you out." Lucia nodded, "and he's getting impatient." That night a knock came at the door of their temporary hide. 3 slow raps, the kind that don't belong to friends. Lucia didn't reach for her gun right away. She smiled, because whoever was on the other side thought they'd found her. And that meant they were close enough to make a mistake. She nodded once to Finn. "Kill the lantern," she whispered. The room went dark. The knock came again, closer, more confident. And Lucia stepped forward, already planning what would break first when the door opened. Knowing that somewhere in the shadows, Amos Reddick had finally decided this wouldn't end with rail lines or burned camps. It would end face to face. And only one of them was walking away. The door opened slow, not kicked, not forced. That told Lucia everything she needed to know. Men who come loud want fear. Men who come quiet want control. The hinge whispered. A shape filled the frame, blocking the night behind it. Then another. Shadows stacked like bad intentions. A voice slid in first. "Even in, ma'am." Polite, southern, practiced. Lucia didn't reach for the gun yet. She stepped forward just enough to be seen. "You're early," she said. The man in front hesitated. That wasn't in his plan. "We're looking for someone," he said. "Woman fits your description." Lucia tilted her head, calm, curious. "Lot of women out here," she said. "Most of 'em tired of being described." A soft chuckle came from behind him. Nervous laughter, not leadership. That meant the leader was still outside, watching. Lucia let her eyes drift past the men into the dark. "Amos should have come himself," she said lightly, "if he wanted this done right." The temperature changed. That name still carried weight. The man in front stiffened. "You got a mouth on you." Lucia smiled. "I earned it." That's when Finn moved, not fast, decisive. The lantern stayed dark. The room exploded into motion. A gunshot cracked too late. Someone screamed. A body hit the floor hard enough to rattle the boards. Lucia's revolver came up smooth. One shot, clean, close, the kind that doesn't echo long. The men outside scattered, shouting, boots tearing at dirt. Lucia stepped out after them, firing once more, not to kill, to remind. The prairie swallowed them whole. When it was over, 2 bodies lay inside. One outside, bleeding into the dust and very much alive. Lucia crouched beside him. He was young, too young to be this stupid. She grabbed his jaw, turned his face toward her. "Tell Amos," she said, voice low and unshaking. "You found me." The boy's eyes widened. "And tell him," she continued, "he should stop sending men who need instructions." She stood, wiped her hands. "Now crawl," she said, "and don't look back." He did. Finn watched him disappear into the dark. "That'll pull him in," he said. Lucia nodded. "That's the point." They didn't stay, they never stayed. By dawn, Amos Reddick heard the report, heard how his men had found her and lost them, heard how one came back shaking, talking about her like she wasn't flesh anymore. Amos didn't shout, didn't break anything. He poured a drink he didn't finish. "She wants me," he said to the empty room. And for the first time since Devil's Bend, he smiled. Not because he'd won, because the game had finally narrowed. Lucia felt it too, miles away, as she packed light and moved again. No more running in circles, no more messages. This wasn't about saving trains now. It was about ending a man who thought the county was his inheritance. She stopped at the edge of a small rise and looked back once. Not for nostalgia, for measurement. Somewhere behind her, Amos Reddick was mounting up, convinced the next meeting would be his. Lucia adjusted her coat, checked her revolver, and stepped into the open. Because when the board clears and the pieces thin out, that's when the real players finally show their hands. The land between them stopped pretending to be neutral. Open ground. No trees thick enough to hide behind. No bends in the road to soften what was coming. Just distance and intent stripped clean. Lucia chose the place on purpose. A low ridge where sound carried wrong, where riders coming fast sounded like they were already late, where a man who believed in numbers would feel naked without them. Finn didn't like it. "You're giving him sightlines," he said. Lucia nodded. "And I'm taking his excuses." They waited until dusk bent the light just enough to lie. Wind pushed sideways, dragging dust along the ground like it was trying to erase footprints before they could form. Then Amos Reddick came. Not with a mob, that surprised Finn, just 6 men, spread wide, rifles visible, calm confidence. The kind of confidence that only comes when a man believes he already owns the ending. Amos rode at the center. No badge, no flourish. Just a dark coat, a familiar posture, and eyes that never stopped measuring. He dismounted slow, deliberate, like the earth owed him patience. "Lucia," he called out. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. "I sent boys," he said. "You sent one back." Lucia stepped into view, alone. Finn tensed behind the rise, finger tight on the trigger, heart hammering against discipline. Lucia didn't look back. "You keep sending boys," she said evenly, "and you'll run out of men who want to be brave for you." Amos smiled thin. "I ran out of patience first." They studied each other across the dirt, 2 people who understood something rare. This wasn't about law, it wasn't about justice. It was about control finally meeting resistance that didn't break. "You cost me a son," Amos said. Lucia didn't flinch. "You cost me more than one life," she replied. "Difference is I didn't expect mercy." A murmur rippled through the deputies. Uneasy, Amos lifted a hand, silenced them without turning around. "You think you won," he said. You freed some people, made noise. But this ends when I decide it ends. Lucia took another step forward. That's where you're wrong, she said. This ends when I do. For a moment nobody moved. The wind slowed. Even the horses shifted like they knew something sharp was balancing on the edge of time. Then Amos spoke again, softer. You sent the boy away, he said. Smart. Lucia felt it, the hit, right under the ribs. She didn't show it. You won't find him, she said. Amos shrugged. Maybe not, but I'll keep looking. Finn's breath caught, because that wasn't a threat, that was a promise. Lucia's eyes hardened, something final setting behind them. That's why, she said, you don't leave here. Amos laughed once, and the world snapped. A rifle cracked from the ridge, not Finn's. Another shot answered from the opposite side. Dust jumped, horses screamed. Men shouted, scrambling, suddenly unsure which direction danger lived in. Amos spun, reaching for his gun. Lucia moved, fast. Too fast for a woman he'd underestimated his whole life. She closed the distance while his men turned their heads, while certainty fell apart, while the idea of control finally bled out into chaos. Finn rose, firing now, controlled, precise, cutting space open. The ridge echoed with violence. And somewhere in that noise, Amos Reddick realized, too late, that this wasn't a meeting. It was an execution that hadn't decided who yet, because Lucia was standing right in front of him now. And only one of them was going to finish the sentence they'd both been writing since Devil's Bend. Amos Reddick's hand never made it to the gun. That surprised him. He'd lived his whole life believing proximity meant power, that if he stood close enough, stared hard enough, the world would hesitate. Lucia didn't. She moved inside his reach, inside the space where rifles were useless and loyalty gets confused. Her revolver was up, steady, not shaking, not angry, just finished. Amos froze, not from fear, from recognition. This wasn't a woman begging. This wasn't a witness. This wasn't someone waiting for permission from God or law. This was the end of a ledger being balanced by hand. You should have left the boy alone, Lucia said. Amos laughed, breath sharp. You think killing me stops this? Finn fired again from the ridge. One of the deputies went down hard, screaming, crawling, learning what it felt like to be on the wrong side of protection. Amos didn't look back. You die tonight, he said to Lucia, and the county breathes easier tomorrow. Lucia leaned in close enough that he could smell iron and smoke on her clothes. No, she said. I die and you still wake up screaming, because you built a machine that taught people how to fight back. She lowered the revolver slightly. Not mercy, a lesson. You already lost, she continued. You just refused to read the numbers. A shot rang out from the far side. One of Amos's men dropped. Another ran. Horses broke, tearing away, carrying panic faster than orders could catch it. Amos's eyes flicked just once. That was the mistake. Lucia struck, not wild. Not desperate. She stepped in, slammed the revolver butt into his wrist. Bone cracked. The gun fell. She followed through hard, driving him down into the dirt that had swallowed so many names he never bothered to learn. Amos hit the ground on his knees, breath knocked out of him, coat filthy, authority stripped down to a man gasping in dust. Lucia stood over him. For a second she saw it all. Camps burning, chains biting, children disappearing into ledgers and lies. She could end it now. One pull. One sound. Finn was already moving down from the ridge, rifle slung, eyes locked on Amos like he was a ghost that needed finishing. Lucia raised a hand. Finn stopped. Amos looked up at her, blood on his lip, eyes wide now, finally understanding the shape of his fear. You won't, he said hoarsely. You need me alive to matter. Lucia smiled. That was the last thing he ever got wrong. I don't need you, she said. I need you remembered. She stepped back and fired, not into his head, into his leg, high, shattering. Screaming pain ripped out of him before he could stop it. He collapsed sideways, clawing at the dirt, howling, all the confidence leaking out of him in sound. Finn stared. Lucia. He lives, she said, long enough. She turned away as deputies fled into the dark, leaving their sheriff broken in open ground, calling for men who were already gone. Lucia walked past Finn without slowing. "They'll find him," she said. "Alive, ruined, talking." Finn swallowed, and then. Lucia didn't look back. "Then the story changes," she said. From legend to warning. Behind them, Amos Reddick screamed into the night, the sound carrying far and ugly, the sound of a man learning too late that control only works until someone smarter stops asking for permission. And somewhere north, a boy with blue eyes slept without knowing that the shadow chasing him had just been cut down to size but not silenced yet. Because unfinished men are dangerous, and Amos Reddick was still breathing. For now. They didn't run. That's what made it dangerous. Lucia and Finn moved off the ridge at a walking pace, the kind that tells the world you already accounted for pursuit. Horses thundered somewhere far off but not close enough to matter yet. The night swallowed sound unevenly, stretching distance, bending truth. Behind them, Amos Reddick was still alive. That was intentional. By sunrise, somebody would find him, a ranch hand, a deputy too scared to finish the job, a farmer who owed him favors and wanted them back. And Amos would talk. Men like him always do when pain strips away the myth. He'd talk about riders, about derailments, about a woman who didn't beg, but most of all he'd talk about the boy. Lucia felt that thought settle heavy in her gut as they crossed a dry wash and climbed into higher ground. You don't walk away from a living enemy without consequences. You just choose which consequences you're willing to pay. Finn broke the silence. "You left him breathing," he said. "Not accusation, confirmation." Lucia nodded. "Dead men turn into martyrs. Broken men turn into evidence." Finn exhaled. "Courts won't touch him." "No," Lucia agreed. "But his friends will distance themselves. His allies will disappear. And the men who followed him because he looked untouchable will remember how he sounded when he screamed." They reached a narrow stand of trees and stopped. Lucia crouched, pressed her palm to the ground like she was listening for a heartbeat. She wasn't listening for Amos. She was listening for the county. After a moment, she stood. "We've got hours," she said, "not days." Finn nodded. "They'll sweep north." "They always do," Lucia said. "They think freedom runs in straight lines." They split there, not dramatically. No handshake, no speeches. Finn took the eastern route toward rail country where he could disappear into schedules and smoke. Lucia turned west toward scrubland and dry crossings where names didn't travel well. Before they parted, Finn hesitated. What if he survives long enough to rebuild? He asked. Lucia looked back once, eyes sharp in the dark. "Then he rebuilds afraid," she said, "and afraid men make mistakes." Vanished into the brush. By mid-morning, Amos Reddick was found exactly where she left him, alive, bleeding, raving. He told anyone who would listen that Lucia May was still out there, that she'd broken his county, that she'd sent trains off rails like it was nothing. Some laughed, some listened. The governor sent word, quiet word, questions disguised as concern, orders disguised as distance. An investigation began, not into the riders, into Amos. Men came to look at his books, his contracts, his labor agreements that smelled too much like the past everyone pretended was buried. And Amos, stuck in a bed with his legs shattered and his authority leaking out of him, watched his world shrink. But hatred doesn't need legs, it just needs time. Lucia reached a safe place by nightfall. Not a home, not a hideout, a pause. She washed blood off her hands in cold creek water, then sat still, letting the dark wrap around her. Somewhere north, a wagon rolled with a boy who didn't know how close the fire had come. Somewhere south, a broken sheriff was already planning his next move. Lucia closed her eyes, not to rest, to calculate, because the war wasn't over. It had just changed uniforms. And the next betrayal, she could feel it now, wouldn't come from a spy or a badge. It would come from someone desperate enough to believe that turning her in was the last way left to stay alive. Desperation travels faster than loyalty. Lucia learned that before dawn without a single word being spoken. The creek went quiet wrong, not peaceful, empty. The insects stopped first, then the wind. Silence like that doesn't happen by accident. It happens when something living decides to hold its breath. She didn't move. Men who survive long enough know when stillness is safer than speed. Somewhere nearby, a foot scraped stone. soft, careful, someone trying not to be heard by a woman who'd already counted the ways this could end. Lucia shifted her weight just enough to feel the revolver against her ribs. "Come out," she said calmly. "You're late and you're breathing too loud." A shape stepped into the open. Not a deputy, not a rider, a local man, rail adjacent. Someone who'd eaten at the same tables as men she once trusted. His eyes were red, not from drink, from the kind of fear that burns sleep out of you. "They're paying now," he said quickly, words tripping over each other. "Bounties doubled, alive or dead, you and anyone who helps you." Lucia studied him. "Who sent you?" she asked. He hesitated. That told her enough. "Amos doesn't need legs to buy courage," she said. "He just needs men with nothing left." The man's jaw tightened. "I got a family." Lucia nodded once. So did the people on those trains. The wind picked up again like it had been waiting for permission. The man's hand twitched toward his coat. Lucia didn't raise her gun. She let the moment stretch, let him feel how thin the line was between choice and consequence. "You don't want this," she said, "because if you take me in, Amos won't protect you. He'll erase you after he's done using you. That's how men like him stay clean." The man swallowed. "You don't know that." Lucia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I built my life surviving men exactly like him," she said. "I know his ending better than he does." For a heartbeat, it looked like he might drop to his knees, like the math was finally catching up. Then another sound came from the trees, a second presence. Lucia felt it land in her spine like ice. This wasn't a lone hunter anymore. This was coordination. The man's eyes flicked sideways, just once. That was all she needed. Lucia moved. The first shot wasn't loud. The creek swallowed it. The man went down hard, not dead, but done. Lucia turned, firing toward the tree line where the second presence had been too careful to reveal itself. Branches snapped. Someone ran. She didn't chase. She never chased. Because now she knew the truth she'd been avoiding. Amos wasn't hunting her alone. Fear was doing the work for him. She disappeared before dawn, leaving nothing behind but a wounded man and questions nobody wanted answered. And miles away, when word reached Amos Reddick that someone had tried and failed to turn her in, he smiled through cracked lips. Because the net was tightening. Not because he was strong, but because the world was full of weak men who thought survival was worth any price. Lucia kept moving north, already planning for the moment when running would no longer be enough, knowing the next encounter wouldn't be with a stranger or a paid hunter. It would be with someone who knew her name, her habits, and exactly where to strike to make her stop thinking like a strategist and start thinking like a mother. And that's when the game would turn truly lethal. The message reached her at dusk, not written, not spoken straight, delivered sideways the way bad news always is. A relay driver she trusted too much didn't show up at the second marker. The wagon arrived empty. No blood, no tracks, just the kind of absence that doesn't happen unless someone planned it. Lucia felt it settle behind her eyes, not panic, focus, because random violence leaves mess. This was clean. She changed direction immediately, cutting east, then north, then back again, folding her trail until even she would have struggled to follow it an hour later. Every step she took was a question asked of the land. Who's watching? Who's afraid? Who's being paid? By midnight she had her answer. A fire burned where it shouldn't have. Low, shielded, too careful to be accidental. She circled it wide, watching shadows move with familiarity. Men who knew how to wait. Men who thought patience made them invisible. She counted 4, not deputies, not bounty hunters, locals, men she'd eaten with, men who'd nodded when she spoke. Men who'd sworn they were done bending their backs for Amos Reddick's kind of power. Fear had finally finished its work. Lucia didn't approach, she listened. "Said the boy's already north," one voice whispered. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "She'll come if we make it look right." Lucia closed her eyes, so that was it. They weren't hunting her. They were baiting her. She moved away before they could feel the shift in the night, slipped back into shadow, breath steady, heart cold. This was no longer about escape routes or rail lines. This was about leverage. Someone had figured out what Amos never fully understood. You don't beat a strategist by outthinking her. You beat her by forcing her to choose between winning and loving. Lucia stopped near a stand of dead trees and crouched low, pressing her forehead briefly to the dirt. Not prayer, alignment. When she stood, her face had changed. Not hardened, clarified. She wasn't going to run from this. She was going to walk straight into it on her terms. Because if they thought they could draw her out using shadows and half-truths, they were already too late. Lucia reached into her coat and pulled out a small scrap of cloth folded tight. She tore it once, clean down the middle. A signal. Not for rescue, for reckoning. Somewhere in the dark, someone who still owed her loyalty would see it by morning. And someone else, someone who thought desperation made them clever, was about to learn what happens when you mistake a mother's restraint for weakness. The trap was set. The only question left was who would step into it first, and who wouldn't step out at all. She arrived before the lie finished settling. The camp was staged just right, too right. Bedrolls laid out like men planned to sleep. A fire burning low, fed careful, not desperate, tracks circling instead of leading away. People who want to be found always overdo the disguise. Lucia stayed downwind, watching the scene like a chessboard she'd already played in her head. She counted breaths. Counted pauses between movements. Counted the way men tried not to look at the trees they'd chosen for cover. 4 again. Same number, different mistake. They thought she'd rush in. They thought she'd trade caution for blood. That's what Amos would have done. Lucia waited. She waited until the man with the twitchy leg shifted his weight one time too many. Until the one pretending to nap adjusted his coat to keep his knife from digging into his ribs. Until the leader, always one, checked the dark like it owed him reassurance. Then she moved, not toward the fire, past it. Her first shot shattered the quiet, not loud but final. The twitchy one folded without a sound, his leg finally still. The second man jumped up, shouting, and that's when Finn's lesson paid off. Sound is a direction. Lucia changed angles before the echo finished. Another shot. Wood burst. A scream cut short. The camp erupted into chaos. Men yelling names like names could save them. One ran straight for the tree line where he thought she was. He was wrong. Lucia stepped out behind him and put the revolver to the back of his head. "Don't," she said. He froze. Hands went up slow, shaking, breath hitching like it was trying to escape first. "You were going to sell me," she said, not angry, certain. "They told me you took children with you," he whispered. "They said you'd get us all killed." Lucia pressed the barrel harder. "Who told you?" He swallowed. "A deputy. Said the sheriff was done playing. Said if we didn't help, we'd burn." Lucia closed her eyes for a count of 2. Amos again. Even broken, he was still loud in the dark. She shoved the man forward, face first into the dirt, and bound his hands with his own belt. She didn't kill him. She needed him walking. "Run south," she said. "Tell Amos you saw me heading west." What? The man scrambled up, terror taking over, and ran. Lucia didn't watch him go. She was already gone. Because while they were busy staging lies, the real danger was moving without noise. She reached the relay road an hour later and found the wagon waiting, not empty, not friendly. 2 men stood by it, silhouettes wrong against the stars. One held the reins, the other held something wrapped in a blanket. Lucia stopped. Every calculation she'd ever made screamed at once. "Set it down," she said. The man with the blanket hesitated. "Careful," he warned. "You don't want to make this worse." Lucia took one step forward. Her voice didn't rise. "There is no worse," she said. "There is only what you do next." The blanket shifted. A small hand slipped out. Lucia felt the ground tilt, not collapse. Tilt, and somewhere far off, too far to reach in time, hooves thundered, moving fast, moving sure. Amos Reddick had finally decided to stop sending men. He was coming himself. And Lucia understood in that breathless moment that the last move wouldn't be about trains or land or power. It would be about whether she could end this without becoming the thing she'd spent her life out thinking. The man tightened his grip on the blanket. The hooves got closer. And the night leaned in, waiting to see which part of Lucia would move first. Lucia didn't reach for the gun. That surprised them. Men who use children as leverage expect noise, panic, bargaining. They expect a woman to break shape when her heart gets put in a vice. Lucia stayed still. The man holding the blanket shifted his stance, trying to read her. He couldn't. Her face had gone quiet in a way that made seasoned killers uneasy. "Easy," he said. "Nobody wants the boy hurt." Lucia nodded once, then put him down. The other man tightened his grip on the reins. Sweat shined on his temple despite the cold. "You come any closer." Lucia cut him off. "You already crossed the line where threats matter." She took another step. The boy's hand twitched again under the blanket, small, alive, shaking. Lucia kept her eyes on the men, not on him. She couldn't afford that weakness yet. "Who paid you?" she asked. The man with the reins laughed too sharp. "Does it matter?" Lucia tilted her head. "It does if you want to walk away." The hooves were louder now, no guessing. A group, horses running hard. The man with the blanket looked back over his shoulder, panic cracking through his confidence. "That's him," he hissed. "Sheriff said." Lucia moved, not forward, sideways, fast enough to break their rhythm. The first shot took the reins man in the chest. He fell backward into the dirt, surprise frozen on his face. The horse bolted, screaming. The man with the blanket yanked the boy closer, dragging him back, gun coming up wild. Lucia didn't fire, she closed distance. She slammed into him shoulder first, driving him down, using her weight, her timing, the ground itself. The gun went off into the sky. The blanket tore. The boy cried out. Lucia wrapped him up in her arms and rolled, taking the hit of the fall so he didn't have to. Her revolver barked once, point blank. The man went still. Lucia was already up, already moving, the boy clutched tight against her chest. She ran, not toward cover, not toward safety. Toward the sound, because running from Amos Reddick with a child would turn into a chase. Running at him would turn into an ending. She crested the rise just as the riders broke into view. Amos was at the front, pale, thinner. Propped in the saddle like pain was the only thing keeping him upright. His leg bound stiff, his eyes burning with something past hatred. He saw the boy. He smiled. Lucia stopped. Wind tore across the open ground, carrying dust, carrying breath, carrying the weight of everything they'd taken from each other. Amos raised his hand. The riders slowed. "You should have kept running," he called. "Now you're standing in the open." Lucia adjusted her grip on the boy, turning her body just enough to shield him. "I ended this months ago," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." Amos laughed, ragged and ugly. "You think this is over because you broke my leg." "No," Lucia said, "because you broke your myth." She took one step forward. Amos's men raised their rifles. The boy buried his face in her coat. Lucia didn't look away from Amos. "Call them off," she said, "or you die knowing your son was the last thing you ever lost." Amos's smile faltered, just a hair. Enough. The wind howled louder, like the land itself was holding its breath. And for the first time since Devil's Bend, Amos Reddick hesitated, caught between the authority he'd lived by and the truth standing 10 paces away, daring him to choose wrong one last time. Hesitation is a language. Lucia heard it in Amos Reddick's silence. 10 paces apart, open ground, nowhere for the lie to hide. His men waited for a signal that didn't come. Rifles stayed shouldered. Fingers hovered, unsure who they were supposed to be loyal to when certainty cracked. Amos's eyes flicked from Lucia to the boy. He hadn't seen him this close before. Not really. Not as flesh and breath and fear. The blue in those eyes hit him like a mirror he'd avoided his whole life. For a second the county fell away. There was no badge, no riders, no rails, just consequences. "You don't get to threaten me with blood," Amos said finally, voice hoarse. "That's my language." Lucia didn't blink. "You taught it well," she replied. "I just learned to speak it without shouting." The boy shifted in her arms. Small fingers clenched into her coat like anchors. Lucia adjusted her stance, grounding herself, letting Amos see exactly what he was trying to claim. "You call them off," she said again, quieter now. "Or this ends in a way you can't bury." Amos swallowed. Pain twisted his face, but not from the leg, from the choice. Behind him, one of the riders leaned in, whispered something urgent, fearful, the kind of whisper that says the men are starting to think for themselves. Amos lifted a hand, not high, just enough. The rifles dipped, not lowered, just unsure. That was the opening. Lucia felt it, the shift in weight, the moment where authority wobbles before it collapses. She took a step forward, so did Amos, and in that instant everything broke at once. A shot cracked from the far right, too early, too scared, fired by a man who couldn't live with not knowing what would happen next. The sound ripped the night open. Horses screamed. Rifles came up. Orders collided. The ridge exploded into motion. Lucia turned, shielding the boy, moving fast, already calculating angles and exits and how many lives this mistake would cost. Amos shouted something, anger or command or regret, it didn't matter anymore. The county surged forward on instinct. And Lucia ran, not away from the chaos, but through it, because the only way out now was to break the line completely. As she disappeared into dust and gunfire with the boy clutched tight, one truth rang louder than the shots. The final move had been forced, and whatever happened next would decide whether this story ended as escape or became something the county would spend generations trying to forget. Gunfire doesn't sound the same when you're protecting something. It loses rhythm, turns sloppy, becomes fear instead of force. Lucia felt every misfired shot as she ran, felt the way men fired too high, too fast, hoping noise alone could fix their mistake. She cut through the line at an angle nobody expected, boots biting dirt, shoulder tight around the boy, body turned so if a bullet came it would find her first. That part wasn't heroic, it was arithmetic. She dropped into a shallow cut in the land just as rounds chewed air where she'd been. Dirt sprayed. The boy cried once, sharp and panicked, then buried his face again when Lucia whispered his name, not loud, not pleading, just present. Behind them, Amos Reddick was shouting. Not commands, names. He was losing control of the men before he lost sight of her. Lucia knew that tone. It was the sound of a system cracking because it depended too much on one voice. She didn't stop running until the ground changed, until scrub gave way to rock, until horses would have to slow or break legs trying to follow. Only then did she duck into a limestone outcrop and press her back to stone, chest burning, lungs raw. The boy clung to her like he understood something final was happening. "Listen," she said quietly, steadying her breath. "When I say go, you run where I point. Don't look back, don't stop." He nodded, no tears now, just fear sharpened into obedience. That scared her more than panic would have. Hooves thundered closer, then slowed. Voices carried, confused, arguing. They went this way. "No tracks cut off," Sheriff said. Lucia closed her eyes for half a second. She knew this moment. This was where hunters split, where leadership either tightens or dies. A shadow crossed the opening. Lucia raised the revolver. But it wasn't a deputy. It was Amos, on foot, dragging himself forward with stubbornness and hate stitched together so tight they looked like courage. His men were behind him now, unsure, letting him lead because they didn't know what else to do. Amos stopped 10 yards out, close enough to see the boy breathing, close enough to hear Lucia's calm. "You could have walked away," he said. "Taken him north, let the county rot." Lucia shook her head. "You would have followed," she said. "You don't stop chasing what proves you're wrong." Amos smiled, thin, broken. "Then this is where it ends." Lucia lifted the gun. So did the men behind him, but nobody fired, because Amos hadn't ordered it, and Lucia hadn't moved. They stood there, locked, the whole war balanced on who would blink first. Lucia spoke, voice low, carrying. "You already lost your men," she said. "You just haven't noticed yet." Amos glanced back, and that's when he saw it, not flight, distance. The line behind him wasn't tight anymore. Riders had spread, some had drifted back, some had lowered rifles without realizing it. Fear had finished its work, authority was leaking. Lucia pointed past Amos toward the dark stretch of land he couldn't control anymore. "Call it off," she said. "Walk away. Let the county pretend this never happened." Amos laughed, breath hitching. "You think they'll forget?" "No," Lucia said, "but they'll survive you." Silence stretched. The boy squeezed her coat. Amos's hand trembled, not from pain, from understanding. He could push this. Order the shot. turn the ground red and make a story big enough to scare people back into line. Or he could live knowing he'd been outplayed by someone he was never supposed to fear. Amos lowered his gun. Not all the way, just enough. "You disappear," he said. "Tonight, forever." Lucia nodded. That was always the plan. She pointed, "Turn around." For a long second, Amos didn't move. Then he did, slow, heavy, defeated in a way no court record could ever show. Lucia didn't wait to see the rest. She took the boy's hand, slipped out through the stone cut, and vanished into land that didn't know Amos Reddick's name. Behind her, the county stood in the dark, armed, confused, and leaderless, trying to understand how power slipped through their fingers without a final shot. And somewhere in that confusion, a dangerous thought began to spread. If one woman could break the system and walk away alive, what else had they been wrong about? They didn't chase. That was the part that stayed with Lucia the longest. She and the boy moved until the land softened again, until rock gave way to dirt that didn't remember footsteps. Dawn came thin and pale, like it didn't want to get involved. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, Amos Reddick's world was already shrinking behind them. Not because he chose mercy, because he chose survival. Lucia knew the difference. They reached a handoff point just before midday. No wagon waiting, no lantern sign, just a strip of cloth tied low on a cedar branch fluttering once in the breeze. Safe. She knelt, checked the ground, then pulled the boy close. "This is where we split again," she said. The boy looked up, eyes still too old for his face. "You coming later?" Lucia didn't answer right away. She fixed his coat, smoothed his hair, memorized him in the quiet way people do when they don't trust time. "Yes," she said finally, not a promise, a direction. He nodded, accepting it the way children raised in danger learn to accept everything. When he was gone, Lucia stood alone for a long time. Then she turned south. Because Amos Reddick might have lowered his gun, but men like him don't change. They adapt. They wait. They let the county forget the sound of their voice before using it again. And Lucia understood something clearer now than she ever had. As long as Amos lived, the story wasn't finished. By nightfall, word was already moving ahead of her. Quiet conversations. Men who suddenly found reasons not to ride for the sheriff anymore. Contracts delayed. Deputies reassigned. Friends who stopped returning his letters. Amos Reddick would survive, but he would survive smaller. And that kind of survival eats a man alive. Lucia kept moving, changing names the way other people changed clothes. Working. Listening. Letting the legend grow without feeding it. She didn't need to derail another train. She'd already derailed something worse. Authority. But late one night, weeks later, as she sat alone near a borrowed fire, a rider passed on the road and didn't know she was there. He was drunk enough to talk to the dark. "They say the sheriff's still alive," he muttered to nobody. "Say he's hiring again. Quiet, careful, says some ghosts need finishing." Lucia stared into the flames. Not angry, not afraid, just thoughtful, because ghosts don't run forever, and neither do men who believe the past belongs to them. Somewhere out there, Amos Reddick was still breathing, still remembering her face, still telling himself the story wasn't over. Lucia stood, stamped out the fire, and stepped back into the night. Because she didn't need to hunt him. All she had to do was wait. And when the past finally came looking for her again, it wouldn't be walking away a second time. Time did what bullets couldn't. It wore Amos Reddick down. Months passed. The county learned how to breathe without him filling every room. Deputies stopped asking his permission before making decisions. Merchants stopped extending credit. The governor's letters came less often, and when they did, they were colder, shorter, administrative. Power hates silence, and Amos was drowning in it. Lucia felt the shift from 3 counties away. You don't survive men like him without learning how their shadow thins before it disappears. Fewer riders, fewer questions, fewer eyes tracking the road at night. That's when he reached for the one thing he had left. A message. It came through a woman Lucia trusted. That was the problem. No threat, no bounty talk, no bravado, just an offer, a meeting, neutral ground. One man, one woman, no guns drawn. He wanted to talk. Lucia read the words twice, then burned the paper. Because men like Amos don't want peace. They want absolution or permission. She went anyway, not because she believed him, because endings don't announce themselves twice. The place was a half-dead rail station that hadn't seen a schedule in years, roof sagging, benches cracked, tracks rusted into the earth like something trying to disappear. Amos was already there. Alone, no deputies, no horses, no crowd to borrow courage from. He looked older, smaller, the legs stiff. The coat worn like it hadn't been replaced since the night he lost everything. "You came," he said. Lucia stepped into the open, hands visible, eyes steady. "You asked," she replied. "That's new for you." Amos smiled thin. "I learned." Lucia didn't respond. She waited. Silence does things to men who used to command noise. "I can't fix what's broken," Amos said finally, "but I can stop making it worse." Lucia studied him. This wasn't a plea, it was a negotiation. "What do you want?" she asked. Amos hesitated just long enough to tell the truth. "An end," he said. "No more riders, no more ghosts. You disappear, I disappear. County moves on." Lucia tilted her head. "And the boy?" Amos's jaw tightened. "I don't want him." Lucia stepped closer. "That's not the same as safe." Amos met her eyes. "I swear it." Lucia almost smiled, almost, because that's when she saw it, the flicker, the glance, the smallest shift of weight behind him, not Amos, someone else. A presence that didn't belong to a man who came alone. Lucia's hand moved not to the gun but outward. "Step back," she said. Amos frowned. "What are you?" The shot cracked, not from her, not from Amos, from the side. The betrayal had been patient, calculated. The woman who carried the message stepped out from behind a railcar, rifle smoking, eyes wide with the kind of fear that makes people do unforgivable math. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "They said they'd let my husband live." Lucia moved as Amos spun, shouting her name too late. The second shot missed. The third never came, because Lucia was already gone, rolling, rising, disappearing into the angles she'd memorized the moment she arrived. The station erupted in chaos. Shouting, running, someone screaming orders nobody followed anymore. Lucia didn't look back. She didn't need to. She'd seen the truth clearer than ever. Amos Reddick wasn't finished because he wanted revenge. He was finished because even the people who feared him most had started selling pieces of him to survive. That kind of power doesn't come back. It just collapses inward. Lucia vanished into the rails and shadow once more, the echo of the gunshot still hanging in the air like a bad decision that couldn't be undone. And behind her, in that broken station, Amos Reddick finally understood the cruelest part of losing control. It isn't being defeated by your enemy. It's being betrayed by the people who learned from you too well. Amos Reddick didn't die at the station. That bothered him more than the bullet ever could. The shot tore through his shoulder, spun him hard, dumped him into the gravel like discarded freight. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, but it wasn't fatal. The woman ran. The echo of her boots faded, and Amos lay there staring at the underside of a roof that used to matter, finally understanding how alone sounds when it stops pretending. By the time help arrived, the story was already broken. No clean villain, no brave stand, no heroics to polish. Just a wounded sheriff, a vanished woman, and a county that didn't feel like lying for him anymore. Lucia didn't slow until the rails curved and the land swallowed the station whole. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had already accepted that safety was temporary and survival was the only honest contract left. She crossed 2 counties in 3 days, changed clothes, changed posture, changed the way she held her shoulders so even mirrors wouldn't recognize her. But some truths don't change. She was done running from Amos Reddick, because men like him don't end with gunshots. They end when nobody answers their calls. Word reached her in pieces, drunk talk, careless whispers, the kind of truth that leaks out when people stop being afraid of consequences. Amos tried to rally support, tried to paint the station shooting as proof of conspiracy, proof that Lucia was still pulling strings. It didn't land. Too many men had already stepped back. Too many accounts were being audited. Too many favors had been quietly revoked. The governor didn't send condolences. He sent investigators. Amos Reddick watched his world shrink from a bed, shoulder wrapped, leg useless, voice ignored. Deputies stopped visiting. The courthouse door closed without asking him. His name stopped opening rooms. That's when the drinking got worse. Lucia heard about that too. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate, she just marked it as expected. Weeks later, she reached the place she'd been aiming for all along. Not a town, not a border, a life, small house, quiet work, a name that didn't carry weight. A place where people judged you by whether you showed up on time and kept your word. The boy was there. Older now. Taller, still quiet. When he saw her, he didn't run, he walked. That told her everything she needed to know. "You're late," he said. Lucia nodded. "I know." They didn't talk about Amos. They didn't talk about trains. Some things don't need rehearsal. Months passed, then a year. Legend grew without her help, changed shape, lost details, gained exaggeration. That was fine. Legends don't need accuracy, they need distance. Then one winter evening, a man came through town selling newspapers. Loud voice, big headlines. Lucia bought one she didn't need. Buried halfway down the page was a small notice. Former County Sheriff Amos Reddick found dead in his home. Cause listed as liver failure. No family present. No public service planned. Lucia folded the paper. No satisfaction. Just closure. Because the end of a man like that isn't loud. It's quiet, ignored, and late. That night, Lucia sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through trees that didn't know her history. The boy sat nearby, reading by lamplight, building a future that didn't require hiding. Somewhere far away, rails still hummed under weight. Systems still tried to rebuild themselves. New men learned old lessons, but Lucia didn't feel the pull anymore. She'd done what she set out to do. She'd debroken the myth, and that was enough. The rest of the world would handle itself. Because once people see that power can bleed, that authority can crack, that even the biggest machine depends on fear staying intact, they never look at it the same way again, and neither did she. Power never dies loud. It learns how to whisper. Years later, the rails still ran. Different schedules, different names on the paperwork. Same old hunger underneath. Men still got rich moving bodies where they didn't belong. Men still told themselves the system was cleaner now because it wore better clothes. Lucia knew better. She felt it the way old soldiers feel weather in their bones. She didn't chase it anymore. Didn't need to. Her work had changed the math. Every sheriff who leaned too hard after Amos carried a quiet fear they couldn't explain. Every rail contract got read twice. Every order to disappear, someone came with a pause. That pause was her. The boy grew into a man who asked careful questions and learned which answers were lies. He never spoke her name in public. Never needed to. He carried the lesson instead. Power only works when nobody pushes back at the right moment. Sometimes on long nights, Lucia would hear a train whistle in the distance. Same sound, different meaning, not a threat, a reminder. Because somewhere out there, another man was always deciding whether to be Amos Reddick or whether to remember what happened to him. And that's the kind of ending that never really ends. It just waits, quiet, watching. The knock came years later, not loud, not urgent, 3 taps, even spacing. The kind that says the person on the other side understands patience. Lucia didn't move right away. She was older now, not slower, just quieter in how she listened. The boy knew the man was gone for the week, chasing work that paid honest and asked no questions. The house knew his footsteps. Tonight it didn't hear them. The knock came again. Lucia stood, reached the door, and rested her palm against the wood. "Who's there?" she asked. A pause. Then a voice she hadn't heard in a long time, or maybe had heard too often in different throats. "They're building something," the voice said. "Rails, contracts, same shape as before, different faces." Lucia closed her eyes, so the whisper had found her again. She opened the door. A young woman stood there, nervous, determined, carrying the same look Lucia once wore when the math turned ugly and there was no clean way out. "They said you'd understand," the woman continued. "They said you'd know what to do." Lucia studied her, the fear, the resolve, the timing. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Start talking." Because power never stops trying. It just waits for people to forget what happens when someone finally answers the knock. Lucia didn't sit down right away. She poured water first. Not tea, not whiskey. Water told you whether someone was actually thirsty or just shaking. The young woman drank like she hadn't stopped running in days. They're calling it development, the woman said. New rail spur, private security, labor contracts nobody can read unless they already know what to look for. Lucia leaned against the table, arms crossed. And people are disappearing, she said. The woman nodded. Not all at once, just enough to keep it quiet. Men picked up for trespassing. Women charged with things that don't stick unless somebody wants them to. Lucia watched her closely now. Who sent you? The woman hesitated, then answered honestly. People who remember stories they were told not to believe. That earned her a fraction of a smile. Lucia walked to the window and looked out at land that had learned to stay neutral. She didn't miss the noise, but she hadn't forgotten the pattern either. Same game, new handwriting. Where is it? Lucia asked. The woman told her. Lucia nodded once, already filing distances, routes, leverage. The old reflexes woke up without asking permission. Not excitement, readiness. You understand, Lucia said quietly, that if I step back into this, I don't get to choose how it ends. The woman swallowed. Yes. Lucia turned. And you understand, she continued, that I won't lead this, not like before. The woman looked confused. Lucia clarified. I don't break systems anymore, she said. I teach people how to lean on the weak parts until they crack on their own. The woman's eyes widened. Lucia reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded map. Old, worn, updated by hand over years. Tomorrow, Lucia said, sliding it across the table, you take this to 3 names circled in red. You don't mention me, you don't mention ghosts. You just ask them what they've noticed. And you, the woman asked. Lucia turned back to the window. I'll listen, she said. That's how you know where to apply pressure. Outside, far off, a train whistle sounded. Lucia didn't flinch. She just counted the seconds between echoes, because the game never really changes. Only who thinks they're winning does. Listening took longer than breaking things ever did. That was the lesson Lucia had learned the hard way. Days passed, then weeks. Messages came back in fragments. A name here, a ledger there. A foreman who drank too much when he thought no one important was listening. A clerk who kept copies because something in the numbers felt wrong even if she didn't know why. Lucia didn't rush it. She spread the information across her table the way a surgeon lays out instruments, not to admire them, to know which one cuts cleanest. They're paying through shell companies, the young woman reported one night, voice steadier now. Security isn't county, it's private. Former soldiers. Men who know how to scare people without leaving marks. Lucia nodded. Good, she said. That means they're afraid of daylight. She circled a point on the map. Not the rail spur, not the camps, the money. You don't attack the muscle, Lucia continued. You starve it, you make it expensive to keep swinging. The young woman leaned in, following the logic, learning the rhythm. So what's the first move? Lucia tapped the map once. We let them expose themselves. The next week nothing happened. No sabotage, no threats, no leaks, just questions, quiet ones, questions that made contractors hesitate, that made insurers raise eyebrows, that made investors ask for documentation nobody wanted to produce. The rail company started sending letters instead of men. Then the letters stopped. That's when the first mistake happened. A worker vanished. Too fast, too public. Lucia heard about it before dawn and closed her eyes for a long count. Fear makes people sloppy, she said. Now we move. She didn't lead a raid, she didn't gather a crew, she sent information, packets, copies. Names tied together so tightly that pulling one thread dragged the rest into the light. Journalists, regulators, churches, labor groups that remembered old scars and knew what new ones looked like. The story broke sideways, not as a crime, as a pattern, and patterns are harder to deny. By the time the rail company issued a statement, it was already behind the curve. Investors froze. Security contracts got reviewed. A senator returned a call he'd been ignoring. The young woman watched it unfold with something like awe. You didn't touch a single rail, she said. Lucia folded the map. I didn't need to, she replied. The rails touch everything else. One night late, the young woman asked the question she'd been holding. Why help? She said, "You could have stayed quiet. Let it be someone else's problem." Lucia looked at her for a long moment. "Because silence," she said, "is how men like Amos get comfortable." Outside, a train passed. Heavy, legal, watched. Lucia listened until the sound faded. Somewhere down the line, deals were collapsing, men were sweating, and a system that thought it had learned how to hide was realizing it had been mapped by someone who never forgot where the weak joints lived. Lucia didn't smile. She just kept listening. Because the moment they tried to fix it with force again, she'd already know where to press next.